The aliens called it waste disposal. A dead battle shell the size of a moon, dumped at humanity's doorstep like a joke. Commander Jack Mercer called it evidence. When the Council laughed at Earth's final warning, he started turning their trash into a forever weapon. If you want war stories with teeth, follow HFY Endurance Tales. Hit like, subscribe, and comment what you do. Now, move forward into the trial they thought humans wouldn't survive. Commander Jack Mercer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Concord Council's chamber was a rotating ring of light and glass, hanging above the neutral station called Marrow's Spire. Delegates floated in magnetic seats like jeweled insects, each behind their species seal and their own private arithmetic of power. Mercer stood in a plain black uniform with a single patch, United Systems Navy. No medals, no theatrics. The only ornament was the thin silver data tab in his hand, because in the Concord, paperwork was a weapon.
Gear secure, no delays.
He kept his eyes on the central dais, where the speaker node shimmered. It wasn't one being, not really. It was a mesh of translators, legal subroutines, and a rotating chair occupied by whatever species had bought the week. Today, the chair belonged to the Keth, tall, rigid. Their faces were a plate of bone with slit vents. Their eyes didn't blink. A clear membrane washed over them like oil. Mercer had read their psychology file twice. He'd learned the Keth believed emotion was a form of weakness, something to be bred out of politics. He'd also learned they were terrified of scarcity. It made them dangerous. Commander Mercer, the speaker note said, voice folding into human phonemes. State Earth's grievance. Keep it concise. Mercer touched the data tab and let the lawful recording begin. A red indicator pulsed. Archive active. By authority of the United Systems Treaty of Sol, and under Article 9 of the Concord Charter, Protection of Emerging Civilizations and Border Worlds, Earth issues a final warning to the Concord Council and its member fleets. A ripple of amusement went through the chamber. Not laughter exactly, more like synchronized contempt. Mercer continued anyway. Effective immediately. 1. All Concord-aligned privateers and proxy fleets will cease interdiction of human shipping lanes in the EOS corridor. 2. All detained human civilian workers taken during the inspection actions at Talon Belt and Haven's Rim will be returned alive, accounted for by biometric confirmation. 3. The Concord will remove the dumped Keth battle shell, designation K Black Husk, from Sol's outer approach, and will cease hazard disposal inside human-recognized borders. 4. The Concord will permit independent verification by neutral observers. Deadline: 30 standard days from timestamp. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of war, and will invoke the Sol defense mandate. He let the last word sit, heavy as a planet. Mercer had argued for more time, a gentler off-ramp. But the raids had already carved into the colonies like a slow, bureaucratic knife. People didn't disappear in space by accident. They disappeared because someone had decided they were tradable. And the K-Black Husk, dumped near the edge of Sol like an insult, wasn't just trash. It was a message. We can put our dead metal anywhere we want.
Remember, rescue
the
first,
Keth speaker tilted its plated head. Your warning is noted. Then, with a gesture too casual for a species that prided itself on restraint, it added, your species is energetic. You build quickly. You consume quickly. It creates concern. The Council will conduct its due process. Mercer didn't bite. He'd spent enough years in fleet intelligence to know what due process meant in the Concord. Delay, debate, blame. Let the frontier bleed quietly while committees counted votes. A different delegate spoke, small, feathered, bright-eyed, the Vasca. Their translator rendered it into crisp English. If the husk disturbs your aesthetic, move it. Your people are good at moving things, yes? More amusement, more contempt. Mercer kept his hands still. He felt the heat rise in his chest anyway, an old human reaction, useless but real. He pictured the colony docks at Haven's Rim, empty work boots lined up, families staring at closed airlocks, trying not to scream. He heard Admiral Thomas Reed's voice from 2 days earlier. Restraint is not weakness, Jack. Restraint is proof we're still human. Mercer wanted to believe that. He also wanted the raiders to stop taking people. Your mockery is also recorded, Mercer said evenly. Earth's warning is lawful. It is specific. It has terms, deadlines, and verification requirements. You have 30 days. The speaker node pulsed. Understood. The KEF speaker leaned closer, vents flaring. Commander, is it true your fleet salvages wreckage as a cultural habit? It's true. We don't waste usable material. That explains your poverty, the KEF said, like it was stating a law of physics. Mercer allowed himself one thin, sharp smile. Or it explains why we're still here. He turned to leave. And as he walked out under the Concorde's stained glass stars, his wrist unit buzzed with a priority signal from Sol Command. A convoy in the EOS corridor, civilian carriers under human flag, had just gone dark. No distress call, no survivors pinging, just empty space where living people had been 1 minute earlier. Mercer's steps slowed, his jaw tightened until it ached. 30 days, the Concorde thought. Mercer stared at the message and realized the deadline wasn't for them. It was for him. Because the raiders had started early, and this time, they hadn't bothered to pretend. The United Systems warship, USNV Vigilant, was built like a blunt instrument. Angular armor, wide engine pylons, and a spine-mounted rail cannon that looked like a god's nail gun. Mercer stood on the command deck, with Admiral Reed's order packet open in his hand. The deck was quiet, in that way warships got when everyone sensed history shifting beneath their boots. Captain William Hayes, Vigilant skipper, was at the center chair, hands clasped, eyes forward. He didn't speak until Mercer finished reading. They hit a convoy inside the EOS corridor, Hayes said. That's not privateer activity. That's a declaration. Mercer nodded once. No survivors, no wreckage. Clean cut. Energy weapons? Not likely. Mercer tapped the display. No radiation spike, no debris field. It looks like extraction. They took them. Mercer felt that familiar internal split, one half wanting to burn everything that flew a Concorde seal, the other half calculating what burning would cost. Admiral Reed wants options, Hayes said. Fast. Mercer's eyes went to the navigation plot. Sol was a bright icon. Beyond it, the outer approaches, where the Keth had dumped their dead shell, glowed with hazard warnings and angry red legal markers. K Black Husk. The size of a moon carcass that the Concorde had disposed of, inside humanity's recognized perimeter. A tomb of old weapons, old systems, old secrets, a gift wrapped in disrespect. Mercer had already run the idea through his mind a dozen times since the council session. Salvage it, study it, turn it into leverage. But leverage could become vengeance if he wasn't careful. Permission to speak freely? Mercer asked. Hayes snorted. Your fleet intelligence. You only speak freely. Mercer pointed at the husk's orbit. We bored it. Silence, then a few low chuckles from the officers who'd overheard. Not because it was funny, because it was so human it hurt. Hayes frowned. That thing's Keth military heritage. Concorde will claim it's protected. Concorde dumped it, Mercer said. On record. Inside our border. It's abandoned property and a navigational hazard. We have legal standing to salvage under charter salvage law and our own mandate. Hayes studied him. That's the lawful argument. Mercer's throat tightened. It's also the practical one. If they're taking civilians, they're building something. They always build something. The husk might tell us what. And if it's trapped? Hayes asked. Mercer thought of the missing convoy, of boots lined up on a dock. Of families learning to swallow grief, because screaming didn't change vacuum. Then, we disarm it, Mercer said. Hours later, Vigilance slid into the shadow of the K-Black husk. Up close, it was worse. The dead shell wasn't just metal. It was a peeled-open skeleton of layered armor plates, warped by old impacts and frozen plasma burns. Whole sections were missing, like teeth knocked out. Along its belly, someone had carved Concord hazard glyphs into the hull, in bright chemical paint. A final insult. Mercer led the boarding team through the airlock in a hard suit, the suit's internal air tasting like plastic and recycled sweat. His team was all business. No jokes now, because even hardened sailors went quiet in the presence of a dead giant. Inside, the corridor walls were black glass and ribbed metal, their suit lamps painted thin cones through dust that drifted like dead snow. They moved in tight formation. Mercer's helmet display tracked oxygen, radiation, motion, and unknown transmissions. The husk was cold, silent, too silent. "Commander," a voice said in his ear, Chief Engineer Mark Sullivan, back aboard Vigilant. "I'm getting faint power fluctuations in the husk. Something's still alive." Mercer felt his pulse tick up. Location? Deep core. Like it's breathing. Breathing. A ship that should have been dead. Mercer signaled his team forward. They reached a cracked bulkhead and forced it open. Beyond it was a chamber like a cathedral turned inside out. Wires hanging like vines, alien consoles fused by old heat, and in the center, a shattered dais where an interface node still blinked. One tiny light in a sea of dead. Mercer approached, gun raised, suit lamp trembling across the node's surface. Symbols crawled along it. Alien script, then Concord legal glyphs, then English. A simple, brutal phrase that made his stomach drop. Property transfer disputed. Source, Concord Adjudication Bureau. Status, sealed record. Sealed record? Mercer whispered. Then the node chimed. Not a warning, a greeting. And a file opened on his visor. A recovered log stamped with the Keth's ancient seal, and a Concord tribunal mark that looked like a scar. The title line alone hit him like a punch. Execution ledger, species erasure, case closed. Mercer's hands went cold inside his gloves. The dead shell wasn't trash. It was evidence. And the Concord had dumped it in Sol because they thought humans wouldn't recognize a mass grave when they saw one. The log began to play, and the first image was a planet burning. Mercer watched the burning world in silence, suit speakers hissing faintly with the husk's ancient audio. The planet below was green and blue, and it had cities, bright lattices along coastlines, until white lines stitched across the atmosphere. The lines weren't missiles. They were beams, precise, cold. Whole regions went dark, then lit again with fire. The husk's log tagged the scene in translated text. Compliance action, final. Mercer's mind snapped through possibilities like a lock-picking tool. This wasn't a war recording made for propaganda. The angles were wrong. The timestamps were bureaucratic. The file read like paperwork. A genocide filed like a tax form. Captain Hayes's voice came over the suit channel, tight. "Commander, talk to me." Mercer swallowed. The husk contained sealed Concord tribunal records. It's proof of a species erasure. The council closed the case. On the other end, a pause that sounded like a man choosing what kind of world he was going to live in. Hayes spoke carefully. "Copy. Can you extract the data?" Mercer stared at the burning planet. A city's lights went out in a wave. People, millions, vanished into heat and ash, and the log didn't call them people. It called them assets. "I can," Mercer said, "but it's protected. I'm seeing encryption layers keyed to Concord authority." Sullivan chimed in. "Commander, I can brute force a slice, but it'll take time." "We don't have time," Mercer said. His team shifted uneasily behind him. rifles tracking dead corners. The husk felt like a tomb that could decide to close its own door. Mercer forced himself to breathe slowly. Restraint, strategy, moral grounding. Don't let them turn you into what you hate. Mercer made the decision anyway. Mark, Mercer said, copy what you can. Priority, any mention of the K-Black husk's origin, function, and why it was disposed in Sol. Working. A new signal pinged on Mercer's visor. Not from Vigilant. From outside. Unknown ships entering the approach vector. Hayes's voice sharpened. Contact. 3 fast movers. No transponder. They're coming hard. Privateers. Or Council deniable assets. Mercer's jaw tightened. They tracked us. His alien counterpart arrived in his life, not by fate, but by bad math and worse politics. The first fast mover slammed into the husk's outer structure, intentionally. A boarding spike. A crude method, but effective. The impact shuddered through the corridor like a giant fist hitting a wall. Mercer's team turned, weapons up. A hatch on the far side of the chamber sparked, then blew inward. Smoke and fragments drifted in low gravity. Shapes poured through. Armored figures with mismatched gear. No uniform, no insignia. Their helmets were cheap. Their weapons weren't. Mercer fired first. 2 controlled bursts. 1 raider spun away. Blood globules floating like dark pearls. A rest scattered behind wreckage, returning fire. The fight was ugly in close quarters. Hard suit joints, ricochets, the constant fear of puncturing your own air. Mercer moved like a man who'd rehearsed violence 1,000 times, without loving it once. He saw one of his sailors take a round through the shoulder plate. The man grunted, didn't scream, and kept firing. Human grit wasn't poetry. It was refusing to quit while your body begged you to. Hayes, Mercer snapped, we've got boarders inside the husk. We need extraction in 4 minutes. Negative, Hayes replied. The unknown ships are trying to pin us. Vigilance engaged. Mercer's options narrowed. Then, through the smoke, 1 raider stumbled forward. Smaller frame, different movement. Not human. Mercer tracked the figure, fired a disabling shot into the weapon arm, and kicked off the floor to close the distance. He slammed the figure into a wall panel, pinning it with his forearm. The helmet cracked. The face beneath wasn't a face in any human sense. Smooth skin like dark glass, eyes set wide, layered with 3 blinking membranes. Along the jawline, thin bioluminescent filaments pulsed, blue-green, flickering faster with stress. Illuminid. Mercer had seen them in Concord dossiers. Sensory specialists, analysts, the kind of species that made other species feel watched. The Luminid's translator clicked on, voice flat and painfully literal. Your grip is excessive. You are compressing my respiratory pores. Mercer almost laughed. Almost. Not because it was funny, because his brain needed a relief valve. Then stop trying to kill my people, Mercer growled. I was not attempting to kill, the Luminid said. I was attempting to retrieve. There is a difference. Yeah, Mercer said. Tell that to the convoy you erased. The Luminid's filaments dimmed, then flared again, like a nervous system arguing with itself. That action was not mine. That action was counsel necessary. A shot cracked past Mercer's helmet, sparking off the wall. His team shouted. Mercer tightened his hold, dragged the Luminid behind cover, and keyed his suit channel. Hayes, I have a live alien, Luminid, possible analyst. I'm bringing her out. Hayes didn't hesitate. Copy, get out now. Sullivan's voice cut in, strained. Commander, download finished. You need to see this. The husk isn't just a wreck. Mercer's visor flashed a new file header. K-Black Husk. Original designation, Eternal Coffin Platform. Primary system, Null Drive Interdiction Core. Status, dormant. Null Drive Interdiction. A system that could kill faster than light travel. A weapon that could turn fleets into stranded targets. Mercer stared at the words and felt the war's shape change in his mind. The Concorde hadn't dumped trash. They dumped a sleeping monster. And now someone else was here to wake it up. Outside, Vigilance hull alarms began to scream, because the unknown ships had just locked missiles onto Sol's civilian lanes. The missiles weren't aimed at Vigilant. They were aimed past it, toward the shipping routes, where unarmed freighters ran food, medicine, and reactor parts between colonies. Mercer sprinted through the Husk's dead corridors, with the Luminid prisoners shoved ahead of him, his team covering their retreat. The Luminid moved with quick, precise steps, filaments flashing like an angry heartbeat. "Your species runs even while making tactical decisions," she said, voice still literal. "That seems inefficient." Mercer grunted. "Welcome to humans. We multitask." A bulkhead door ahead was jammed half open. Mercer squeezed through, suits scraping metal. His mind raced. Null drive interdiction core, dormant, but present. If the Concorde or their proxies woke it, they could shut down FTL and Sol's approaches. Strand human fleets. Then pick colonies apart one by one. They'd be lawful about it too. Committees and seals, while people died. He hated how well he could see it. "Commander," Hayes said in his ear, voice tight with controlled fury. "We can't intercept all inbound missiles. Too many." Mercer felt the old anger surge, hot, clean, righteous, and with it, the temptation to stop being restrained. He forced it down. Strategy first. Mercy where possible. Necessity where required. "Give me 30 seconds, Mercer said. "I have an idea." He reached the Husk's outer access and slapped the manual release. The hatch opened to a jagged breach, looking out into the stars. Vigilant hung nearby, exchanging fire with two fast movers, while a third ship, bigger, uglier, guided missiles like a shepherd. Mercer keyed his suit thrusters and pushed off into open space. "Commander," one of his sailors shouted, but Mercer was already moving, towing the Luminid by a tether like unwilling cargo. He hit Vigilant's airlock hard. Hands grabbed him, hauled him in. Mercer ripped his helmet off, lungs gulping warm recycled air. The Luminid was pulled in after him, blinking those layered eyes like she was trying to read the ship by taste. Captain Hayes met him at the hatch, eyes fierce. "Report." Mercer shoved the data tab into Hayes's hand. "The Husk contains a null drive interdiction core. If we wake it, we can shut down FTL near Sol." Hayes stared. "If we wake it, we might shut down our own fleet." Mercer nodded. "Yes." Hayes looked at him, measuring. "You're suggesting we set a minefield in our own front yard." Mercer said, "I'm suggesting we stop thinking like prey. We can't outvote them in a chamber. We can't outpolitic them in committees, but we can outplan them." Hayes's jaw flexed. "And the missiles?" Mercer pointed at the plotting table. "We don't chase every missile. We cut the hand guiding them." Hayes turned to weapons. "Target the guidance ship. I am now, apparently, a hostage." "You're a witness," Mercer corrected. "And you're gonna tell me why the Council is taking civilians." Tala's eyes shifted, membranes flicking. "Because your species is a variable. Variables become threats. Threats become contained." Mercer felt sick. "Contained how?" Tala's filaments brightened, uncomfortable light. "Labor, leverage, deterrence. It is efficient." Hayes' face went stone. "They're building something." Tala nodded once, blunt as a hammer. "Yes, a gravitic lance platform. Your worlds are heavy. They wish to remind you." Mercer's skin prickled. "Where?" Tala hesitated. Her posture changed, like she'd hit the edge of what she was allowed to say, even now. Then she spoke anyway, voice flat with a kind of horrified honesty. "Shipyard cluster at Sable Reach. Hidden behind treaty lanes. The Council will claim it is infrastructure renewal. It is a weapon." "We go." Hayes didn't ask for permission. He just turned to Nav. "Plot emergency jump." Nav Officer Mark Bennett swallowed. Sable Reach is behind the Shatterbelt. Pulsar debris. Jump hazard. Mercer's mind ran the numbers and saw the risk. Losing the ship, losing the crew, losing any chance to stop the lance before it fired. He also saw the alternative. Earth, colonies, and every civilian lane reduced to hostages under a council boot. Do it, Mercer said. As the ship prepared to jump, Sullivan's voice came over internal comms. Urgent. Commander, there's more. The Husk core isn't just interdiction. It has a secondary mode. A wake-up protocol. Mercer felt his blood run cold. Explain. Sullivan swallowed audibly. It's labeled in Old Keth script. Translation is rough, but it reads like, he paused, then said it. Eternal doom. Mercer stared at the jump countdown. The aliens had dumped a dead shell. Humans had started to understand it. And now the ship was about to plunge through a hazard zone to stop a superweapon, while carrying a prisoner who might be the only one telling the truth. The jump klaxon sounded. Space twisted. And Tala, watching the stars bend, said in that blunt, unromantic voice, "Your species does not fear consequences. That is alarming." Mercer didn't look away from the void. Good, he said. Because the Shatterbelt swallowed Vigilant, and something in the husk, far behind them, began to wake. Vigilant came out of the Shatterbelt jump with alarms screaming and half the deck lights flickering, like they were trying to decide whether to live. Mercer tasted copper. His ears rang. The ship had taken micro-debris impacts along the port side, nothing lethal, but enough to remind everyone that space didn't care about courage. Captain Hayes forced his voice steady. Status. Engine stable, Sullivan reported, breathless. Port shields at 60. We're intact. Contacts? Hayes asked. Nav's hands danced. Multiple. Sable Reach shipyard cluster ahead, and fleets, Concord signatures. Mercer stepped to the plot. Sable Reach looked like a constellation made of scaffolds, industrial rings, fuel depots, skeletal hulls under construction. Too many hulls for infrastructure renewal. And at the center, a spine-like platform being assembled around a gravitic core. The lance. He wasn't seeing a weapon built in anger. He was seeing a weapon built in committee, clean, planned, and justified. Tala stood near the bulkhead, restrained but upright, filaments pulsing low, her gaze fixed on the shipyard with something like shame, or maybe just hard truth. That is it, she said. You are late. Hayes glanced at Mercer. Options. Mercer's mind narrowed. War wasn't just firepower. It was timing, information, logistics, and psychology. We don't announce ourselves, Mercer said. We cut their supply chain and pull civilians out first. Hayes frowned. Civilians? Mercer pointed to a smaller cluster of habitats attached to the shipyard's shadow. Those aren't military barracks. Those are worker pods. Tala's voice was quiet. Yes, they use bonded labor. It reduces costs. Mercer's jaw tightened until it hurt. We're not blasting that. He just nodded once, like a man accepting a harder road because it was the right one. Mercer keyed internal comms. Boarding teams, prep for zero-G insertion. Objective 1, sever lance power feeds. Objective 2, extract worker pods. Capture documentation, alive if possible. An officer muttered, half to himself, rescue first ethics, even here. Mercer heard it and answered without turning, especially here. The insertion was silent. A black wedge of Vigilant slid into the shipyard's debris shadow, while decoy drones lit up the far side with false signatures. Psychological warfare wasn't always speeches. Sometimes it was making your enemy chase ghosts. Mercer rode the shuttle with 12 men and Tala because she'd insisted, bluntly, that her knowledge of shipyard layouts made her more useful than a wall. Hayes had allowed it, after a long look at Mercer that said, if she betrays us, it's on you. Mercer accepted that. The shuttle latched onto an external maintenance lock. The hatch opened onto a corridor that smelled like hot metal and chemical sealant. Gravity was low and uneven. Every footstep felt like walking through a bad dream. They moved fast. Tala pointed with a three-fingered hand, filaments glowing faintly. Power trunk. That direction. Worker pods, below. Mercer nodded. Team 1 with me to power, Team 2 to pods, no shooting unless you have to. One of his men, Lieutenant Ryan Ford, whispered, Commander, they're building a planet killer, and you're worried about noise. I'm worried about becoming the kind of species that doesn't notice who's under the boot. Move. They reached a power junction the size of a house. Gravitic conduits ran through it like veins, humming with restrained force. Sullivan wasn't here. He was back on Vigilant, but Mercer had memorized the sabotage sequence. He planted shaped charges, not enough to vaporize, just enough to collapse the conduit and force a shutdown. Then a voice rang out in harsh Concord trade speech, translated in Mercer's ear a half-second late. Human intruders, lay down arms. You are in violation of Council construction sovereignty. A security line formed at the far end of the corridor. Mixed species in proper uniforms, not raiders. Their posture was tense, frightened, and determined. Not cartoon villains. People following orders because they believed the Council's story. Humans were dangerous, expanding, unpredictable. Mercer stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. We're here to stop a superweapon. We'll take your surrender. We'll provide evacuation corridors. You don't have to die for a committee. A Keth officer, bone-faced, vents flaring, raised a weapon anyway. Your species is a contagion. We contain contagions. Mercer felt the anger rise again. He swallowed it hard enough to taste blood. Last chance, Mercer said. Stand down. The Keth officer didn't. The corridor became noise and light. Mercer's men fired in tight, controlled bursts. Precision, not slaughter. They aimed for limbs, gear joints, disabling shots. Some enemies fell alive, choking in shock, not dead. But not all shots could be gentle in a hallway full of lethal intent. Mercer crossed the junction, slammed the charge trigger, and felt the shipyard shudder as the power trunk collapsed with a muffled thunder. Lights dimmed. The gravitic hum stuttered like a dying heartbeat. Over comms, Ford's voice came ragged. Commander, worker pods secured, but we've got resistance. And they're human. Mercer froze. Say again. They're human civilians, Ford said. Alive. In restraints. They're using them as... Ford's words cut off in a burst of static and a distant boom. Mercer's vision narrowed to a tunnel. He ran. Down ladders, through service ducts, boots barely touching deck plating. He found the worker pod bay, a cavern of stacked habitats, pressurized bubbles, and metal ribs. And there, humans, hundreds. Men in work clothes with shaved heads and tracking bands. Some stared like ghosts. Some lunged forward, desperate. A few had bruises around their wrists from shackles. One older man grabbed Mercer's sleeve and croaked, Earth? Is Earth still? It's still there, Mercer said, voice rough. We're getting you out. Tala stood behind Mercer, filaments flaring bright, too bright. Her literal voice cracked just a little. The council said you were treated fairly. That was inaccurate. Mercer almost snapped at her. Almost. But he saw something in her posture that wasn't denial anymore. Shock. Respect, trying to form. Unwilling. Then alarms wailed. New alarms, deeper and uglier. A shipyard-wide voice boomed in Concord Standard. Lance Platform Emergency Protocol initiated. Kinetic fallback authorized. Tala's eyes widened, membranes flicking fast. No. Mercer grabbed her arm. What does that mean? Tala's filaments pulsed like a warning light. If the lance cannot fire, they will use the husk. Mercer's stomach dropped. What? Tala spoke fast, blunt, terrified. The K-Black husk was not disposed, it was positioned. It is on a collision line with your inner system. They planned a navigation accident. A dead shell cannot be tried in tribunal. Mercer's mind went cold. A moon-sized carcass, already inside Saul's approaches. A guided accident. A kinetic kill that would wipe out worlds without a single shot fired in anger. He keyed comms, voice turning to steel. Hayes, abort extraction. We have a bigger problem. The husk is a weapon. They're dropping it on us. Hayes's reply came back like a punch. Commander, we just got a signal from Saul. The husk's orbit changed 5 minutes ago. Mercer stared at the rescued civilians, at the shattered workers' bay, at the men who had been stolen like cargo. He had wanted restraint. He had wanted lawful warnings and measured force. Now a dead shell was falling toward home, and his next order would decide whether humanity stayed human or just survived. Outside the bay, a countdown began to broadcast on all frequencies. Impact in 19 hours. Commander Jack Mercer didn't sleep. He stood on Vigilance command deck with the impact countdown running in the corner of every tactical feed. 19 hours became 18. 18 became 17. Time didn't feel like numbers anymore. It felt like a hand tightening around Saul's throat. The rescued civilians were already aboard human carriers, escorted by drones and frigates that had been rerouted at breakneck speed. The logistics chain was brutal, elegant, and entirely human. Fuel caches opened, med stations deployed, corridors cleared. Rescue first ethics, even while the war sharpened its knife. Captain Hayes watched Mercer like he was watching a man hold a live wire. "You're thinking about waking the husk," Hayes said quietly. Mercer didn't deny it. "It's already awake, just not ours." Sullivan's voice came over comms, strained. "We can interface with the null drive interdiction core, but it's old Keth architecture. If we misstep, we could black out our own fleet in the approach." Mercer stared at the tactical plot. The K-Black husk's new trajectory, the Concorde fleets massing behind treaty lanes, the shipyard at Sable Reach, limping but not dead. He felt the internal conflict like a physical wound. Restraint versus vengeance. He could take the husk and turn it into a trap that would strand every Concorde ship near Sol, then butcher them at leisure. It would work, and it would be wrong. He thought of Admiral Reed again, and the words that had once sounded like comfort. Restraint is proof we're still human. Mercer keyed a secure line to Sol Command. Reed's face appeared, older, tired, eyes bloodshot from too many days of crisis. "Jack," Reed said, voice hoarse, "talk." Mercer delivered the truth in clean lines. The shipyard weapon, the bonded labor, the kinetic plan using the husk, Tala's testimony, the interdiction core labeled Eternal Doom. Reed didn't interrupt once. When Mercer finished, Reed leaned back like the weight finally had a name. "They dumped it in our yard and called it trash." "Yes, sir." Reed's eyes hardened. "You have authority under the Saul defense mandate. But I'm telling you this as a man, not an admiral. If you let rage steer, it'll take you places you can't come back from." Mercer's hands tightened behind his back. "And if we don't steer hard enough, we don't come back at all." Reed held his gaze. "Then do it the human way. Give them an off-ramp they don't deserve. Document it, broadcast it, make them choose." Mercer's throat tightened. "Understood." He cut the link and turned to Hayes. "Open a wideband legal channel. Concorde Council. All member fleets. All neutral observers." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You're going to talk to them while a moon is falling." Mercer's voice was calm, and that calm scared even him. "Yes. The final warning wasn't enough, so we give them the last off-ramp." Minutes later, the Concorde symbols appeared in the feed. Dozens of species, dozens of political masks,
all green, Commander.
And Tala stood at Mercer's side, restrained but present. Her bioluminescent filaments glowing in a steady, solemn rhythm. Not decoration, evidence. Mercer spoke. "This is Commander Jack Mercer of the United Systems Navy, acting under lawful authority of the Sole Defense Mandate and Article 9 of the Concord Charter. This message is recorded and distributed to all neutral archives. Concord fleets have conducted proxy raids, abducted civilians, and constructed an illegal gravitic lance platform at Sable Reach. When that weapon was compromised, Concord Command initiated a kinetic fallback using the K-Black Husk, altering its orbit towards Sol. Here are the terms of surrender and de-escalation. 1. All Concord-aligned vessels will immediately cease fire and power down offensive systems. 2. All abducted human civilians will be returned. We have recovered some. We will recover the rest. 3. The K-Black Husk will be remotely deorbited and redirected under human supervision, with neutral observers verifying the maneuver. 4. Concord leadership and those who authorize civilian abductions and kinetic strike will submit to tribunal under the Charter. Deadline: 2 hours from timestamp. We will hold evacuation corridors open during that time. Any vessel that transmits surrender code will be escorted, not destroyed." He paused and let the silence stretch. Then he added, voice low and quotable, "We're not here to be feared. We're here to be left alone. You chose otherwise." The council's reply came fast, and it was exactly what Mercer expected. A Keth delegate leaned forward, vents flaring. "Your terms are a humiliation. We will not submit to your primitive justice." Another species chimed in, oily and political. "You are manipulating neutral sentiment. This is theater." Tala spoke suddenly, without being asked. Her literal voice rang clean. "It is not theater. I saw the labor pods. I saw humans in restraints. Your statements are false." The chamber rippled. Shock, discomfort, anger. Mercer watched them argue, watched them try to turn the moment into politics, and he felt something inside him settle. They had been given the off-ramp. They had looked at it and chosen the cliff. Hayes spoke softly.
Medical kits.
2 hours?
Remember, rescue first.
2 hours.
Let's move.
Then, as if the galaxy couldn't bear even that mercy, a new alert screamed. Sable Reach had relit. Not the lance. Something else. Sullivan's voice came tight. "Commander, they're energizing a remote guidance array. They're going to steer the husk manually. Impact window is shortening." Mercer didn't hesitate again. "Initiate Eternal Doom Protocol." Hayes's eyes flicked to him. "You sure?" Mercer's voice was steady, but his stomach churned. "Do it." The plan wasn't a superweapon in the childish sense. It was a trap. An interdiction net built from the husk's null drive core and human engineering discipline. Humans didn't win wars by having the biggest gun. They won by making the enemy's options disappear. Fleet tenders had already seeded the approach with relay buoys and mass anchors. Quiet objects placed months ago under routine survey operations. Human logistics hidden in plain sight. Sullivan had stitched the net into those anchors. When the husk's core woke, it didn't just shut down FTL. It defined a volume of space where faster-than-light travel couldn't function. A box. A cage. An eternal doom, not because it killed by itself, but because it made escape a myth. Mercer watched the outer approach feed as the net expanded like an invisible tide. Concord ships surged toward Sol, confident in treaty lanes and political immunity, until their drives sputtered and died, one after another, like candles snuffed by a god's breath. Panic lit their comms. Hayes's voice was grim satisfaction. "They're stuck." Mercer felt no joy, only necessity. "Broadcast again," Mercer ordered. "Evac corridors open. Surrender code recognized. Any ship that powers down gets escorted out of the cage." The first surrender came from a small escort frigate, its captain's voice shaking, desperate, not evil. Then another, then a third. Mercer let them go. Some Concord commanders, trapped and furious, opened fire anyway. That was the tragedy. Not that they had motives, but that their motives had hardened into murder math. Vigilant and the Sol Defense Fleet answered with precise brutality. They didn't target life support. They didn't burn habitats. They hit engines, weapons mounts, comrades. They turned warships into drifting metal. Alive crews inside, forced to choose surrender or suffocation in their own stubbornness. Mercer watched a Concord cruiser refuse surrender and try to ram a human carrier full of evacuees. He gave one order, and it felt like swallowing glass. Rail cannon, disable. The shot tore the cruiser's spine open. It spun, venting atmosphere in a white plume, and for a second, Mercer saw bodies, tiny, tumbling, silent. He looked away. He'd offered the corridor. They'd chosen the wall. Hours into the battle, the cage held. More Concord ships surrendered. Human escorts guided them out, one by one, like shepherds moving wolves through a gate. But the husk was still falling, because the Council's guidance array was still pushing it. Mercer turned to Tala. "Can you access their guidance command codes?" Tala's filaments dimmed, then brightened with a strange, steady resolve. "They will not like it." Mercer's mouth tightened. "Neither do I." A strike team launched. Mercer insisted on leading it, not because he craved heroics, but because he couldn't ask others to bear the moral weight alone. They threaded through debris, used the interdiction cage to slip past confused Concord patrols, and boarded the remote guidance station, an ugly thing bolted to an asteroid like a parasite. Inside, they found not monsters, but terrified technicians and a handful of Keth officers with political orders branded into their posture. Mercer raised his weapon, then lowered it. "We're not executing prisoners," he said, voice like iron. "You surrender, you live." A Keth officer hissed, "Your mercy is weakness." Mercer stepped closer. "No, my mercy is control." Tala interfaced with the guidance core, her filaments flaring bright enough to paint the corridor walls in blue-green light. She spoke, blunt and exhausted. "I am reversing the vector." Outside, the K-Black husk's trajectory shifted. Slow, like a continent deciding to move. Impact in Sol became a miss. Not safety, not yet, but a miss. Mercer exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. Then, like the galaxy demanding payment, the guidance station's reactor began to howl. A Keth officer, wounded and furious, slammed a hand onto a deadman switch. "If we cannot contain you," it rasped, "we will cauterize." Sullivan's voice snapped in Mercer's ear. "Commander, reactor overload. If that station blows, it'll chain into the husk's core wake link. It could collapse the interdiction net uncontrolled. Maybe permanently. We could black out Sol's approach for years." Mercer's mind flashed through consequences. Trade dead, colonies isolated, famine, chaos, victory turning into a slow strangulation. He looked at the Keth officer, then at Tala, then at his men. This was the final internal battle. Vengeance would be easy. Shoot, leave, let it burn. Necessity was harder. Fix the problem, even if it saved the enemy from their own stupidity. Mercer made the call. "Ford," he barked, "secure that switch. Non-lethal if you can. Hayes, prep tow cables. We're dragging this station away from the wake link." Hayes' voice came back sharp. "Tow? In combat?" Mercer gritted his teeth. "Yes, humans move trash, remember?" The tow worked, barely. Vigilance engines screamed as it hauled the overloaded station out of the wake link's line. The reactor blew in a silent bloom of light, far enough away that the net shuddered but held. The cage remained stable, Sol remained connected, and the husk, redirected, drifted past the inner system like a dead god that had missed its target. The battle ended not with a single decisive explosion, but with a flood of surrender codes and the quiet click of weapons powering down. The Concorde's surviving leadership tried to flee. They couldn't. Eternal doom wasn't a gun. It was the end of running. Weeks later, the tribunal convened at Marrow Spire. Same station, same rotating ring, but different air. Human flags and neutral observer seals hung beside Concorde glyphs. For the first time, the council looked less like a chorus of certainty and more like a collection of species realizing their laws had teeth. Mercer stood in uniform again, sleepless lines carved into his face. He gave testimony. Clean, documented, timestamps intact. He played the burning planet log from the husk. He presented the labor pod records. He showed the final warning and the council's mockery. Then Tala stood. She had been offered asylum. She had rejected the word as imprecise. She had accepted protected witness. Her filaments glowed steady as she addressed the chamber in blunt Concorde trade speech. Translated into 100 tongues. I served resource security, Tala said. I believed containment was efficient. I believed humans were unstable. I was wrong. They issued a lawful warning with clear terms and a deadline. The council ignored it. Then the council stole civilians. Then the council built a lance. Then the council redirected the husk towards Sol. Humans did not respond with indiscriminate destruction. They opened evacuation corridors. They accepted surrender. They rescued even while fighting. They did warn you. The chamber was silent in a way Mercer hadn't thought possible. Treaties changed after that. The Concorde Charter was amended. Article 9 strengthened with enforcement clauses, not just words. Border world oversight shifted to neutral coalitions with human seats included. Hazard disposal inside sovereign borders became a war crime under new language so clear even a committee couldn't wriggle out. The K-Black husk wasn't scrapped. It was anchored at the edge of Sol as a monitored relic, its null drive core sealed under joint control, neutral locks, human safeguards, and a simple plaque in English and Concorde standard. Abandoned trash became a warning system. Do not test it. On the frontier, reconstruction began. Haven's Rim's docks filled again. Boots weren't lined up for missing workers anymore. New ships ran the lanes under convoy protections that were disciplined, boring, and effective. The best kind of protection. Mercer stood on Vigilance observation deck, looking out at the stars. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had done what was necessary, and would carry the weight forever. Hayes joined him, quiet. We won. We paid. Hayes stared at the distant glint of the anchored husk. They'll call it the eternal doom for 100 years. Mercer's voice was rough. Let 'em. Names don't matter. Choices do. A message arrived. Official seal, tribunal summary, signed by Admiral Reed. Concorde leadership convicted. Reparations ordered. Civilian return operations authorized. New frontier treaty ratified. Mercer let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Tala appeared at the doorway, still professional, still blunt, still glowing faintly. Commander Mercer. He turned. Tala. She tilted her head, membranes flicking. Your species has a phrase, we told you so. It is inefficient. It provokes conflict. Mercer almost smiled. Yeah, it does. Tala's filaments pulsed once, steady as a vow. Then, I will use more precise words. She looked past him, toward the stars, toward the anchored dead shell that had nearly ended everything. And she said, for the record, and the galaxy, and anyone who still thought humans were bluffing, humanity delivered the final warning. The galaxy chose to laugh. Now the galaxy will remember. Mercer watched the lights of Sol's renewed lanes drift like veins of gold through the dark. Hope wasn't free. It was earned. And the mic drop truth hung in the air like a verdict. They did warn them. If you stayed to the end, drop a comment with the moment that hit you hardest, and share this story with someone who loves hard sci-fi and human grit. Subscribe for more from HFY Endurance Tales, because the next time the galaxy mistakes humanity's restraint for weakness, it won't be a lesson they survive.